Howdy folks, and welcome to RandomJank. Now, as we're edging closer and closer to the Theros pre-release, which then leads into the Theros release, we're going to be looking back at all the wonderful cards that we had in Innistrad block that aren't here anymore. Now, a few weeks ago we did the Innistrad top 5, so this week we're going to do Dark Ascension. Number 5, Chalice of Life. Now, when Innistrad first started out, all the flip cards, they were all creatures. Now, most of them were werewolves because they want to represent something that represented the human side and the werewolf side. But when Dark Ascension came out, the flip cards were actually a little bit more varied. This is one of the ones that I actually started looking at from the get-go, because as soon as I saw tap 1 to gain 1 life, and the flip side, which is tap to lose 5 life, what better way to just eliminate an opponent in a very unstoppable way than having this thing out there? And in a pure life gain deck, which life gain doesn't suck, awesome card to include in your deck. Number 4, Increasing Confusion. Now, this is a card that I include in every single blue deck that I've got, because any kind of mill that you're doing to your opponent is going to be disrupting his plans. With the exception of Reanimator, we've already covered this, I can't do Reanimator stuff. For some reason, I just can't beat it. For blue and X, they're milling that amount of cards, and when you cast it on the flashback, it's the exact same casting cost, but they mill double the amount of cards. So it's an excellent card to include in a dedicated mill deck where you end up getting a lot of mana that you're not necessarily using every single turn. The downside is that it is a sorcery, not an instant, so you can only do it on your turn, but let's face it, if you have that much mana sitting on the board, you're not going to be doing much with it. Now, very recently, they came out with another card called Mind Grind. Now, instead of it being blue and X, it's blue, black, and X, and the X actually stands for the number of lands that your opponent has to mill. So it's a slightly better card, but there's no flashback on it because the Return to Ravnica block had no flashback cards. I'm always kind of in question on which one of the two that I should include, but Increasing Confusion will always have a place in my heart. Number 3, Call to the Kindred. Now, I know what you're thinking, it's an enchantment, and you have to put it onto a creature, so if they have a removal spell, it's a 2-for-1 against you. But let's face facts, removal spells are actually there to eliminate your creatures in the first place. And by playing most of your spells, you're kind of relying on your opponent not being able to screw up your own creatures in the first place. Now, I love anything that's tribal, and I love the fact that I can pop this onto any of my zombies in my EDH deck, and I can just start going through my deck as quickly as possible, just because it helps me save spots on all the tutors. Like, I don't have to try and spend money on a Vampiric Tutor or Diabolic Tutor or any of the other tutors, because this is doing all the work for you. Really good in tribal theme decks, not necessarily the best card in the world, but it is one of my favorites. Number 2, Soren, Lord of Innistrad. Now, in the course of the story, Soren is actually the planeswalker that created Avacyn, the big angel that's at the heart of the entire storyline. And to represent that, they made out this card which can make vampires and give an emblem that just buffs up all your creatures. I've included this in every single black-white deck that I could possibly think of. He was in my black-white tokens, he was in my black-white life gain. The fact that the 1/1 creatures that are coming out are also lifelink creatures, just phenomenal. I have never seen a time where I had this card in my hand where I thought it was a bad idea to cast him. Unless there was already one on the field on my side, and nowadays, it doesn't happen all that often. And finally, number 1, Gravecrawler. Now, any card that comes out and only requires 1 to be cast, you start looking at it really, really closely, because A, you want to be casting it as early as possible, and you don't want to be wasting cards in the early game. You're mostly just using that to either push through with a lot of damage and win the game very quickly, or you want creatures that can stall things out. Now, this creature is great at that. It can't block, unfortunately, but in a dedicated zombie deck, which I have made several, this thing never goes away. Because it only costs 1 for a 2/1, there's no reason not to spend the mana to actually bring it out of the grave when he dies, and there are plenty of combos, like the one that I have with Grim Grin and Diregraph Captain, and sacrificing it to cause your opponent to lose life. There's a Rooftop Storm out, comes out for free, and you just have this infinite loop of absolute unstoppableness. Looking forward to it the moment they previewed it, and I was just plotting out as many decks as possible for this card. And unfortunately, I didn't come up with very many. It's just my EDH and any zombie deck that I came up with, but it's the first card that I include in any single zombie tribal deck that I've ever come up with. So those are my top 5 of Dark Ascension. Let me know in the comments below which cards that you liked from the same set. Unfortunately, I've had a little bit of technical issues and my own computer died, so I have not been able to update the Tuesday blog, but I will be getting back to that as soon as possible, and I will see you next week Friday with another video. Number 5, Chalice of Life. Now, in the original Innistrad, we've already covered this. I can't do reanimator stuff. For some reason, I just can't beat it. Now, 1x, or without actually having to waste a slot for, say, a demonic confusion. Really hate screwing up the card names.